Well, last week we had kind of left off. You had mentioned to me, Mom, that you wanted to dive into kind of leadership in families and homes and whatnot, and we had touched on strategic leadership. We didn't really go into it in a whole lot of depth, but this week that's kind of the main focus of our conversation is kind of strategic leadership and parents' roles. I think we might even probably touch on, kids and whatnot, how they play a part into that, and even, I'm sure that there's other elements that I'm missing, but even how other people play into kind of leadership in the home and such. So, without taking more time, I'd love for you to kind of give us an idea of what it is that's on your mind and heart, and kind of go from there.
Hey, thanks, bud. Um, I guess for me, again, speaking, I'm an observer that lives in the world today, and I'm not an expert. I'm not someone who professes to have any, expertise in what we're talking about, other than I've just, I'm a witness for a lot of things. Um, Last time you and I talked, you had mentioned at church just, what is kind of the detailed view of what strategic leadership might mean, because maybe it's a confusing concept. And I thought a lot about that, knowing that at least in corporate world jargon, and even in the world where I live in Pilates world jargon, and there's mental health and all these politically buzzwords that kind of pop in our society. And so, what does strategic vision look like as far as leadership for a family? And so I wanted to break that down a little bit. And for me, there are so many things looking back on how I parented, how I, you know, lived my life in my marriage, that I wish I had had kind of a mentor or someone to give me a little bit of a place to examine some of the things that were happening in real time. And so that is kind of how I see myself now, is uncomfortably talking about topics maybe that, again, I'm not an expert on, but I wish someone had kind of brought to the forefront to think about. Um, and I did have a couple of experiences like that when I went to Education Week with my sister-in-law Jolena at different times, and we would run to different classes and sit at kind of the feet of the experts who were in real time in the industry. And those experiences were actually very life-changing for me, to just have an opportunity to think about some broader view concepts that I then could see how I fit into in a small way. Um, so, strategic leadership versus emotional management or leadership of a home. And the whole idea that you're trying to kind of get to, I think, nowadays, especially, is who, as you talk husband, wife, who are we as a family? What is our identity? What does that look like? And that's impacted by so many things: the people in the home, the people outside of the home. People outside of the home can include where you work, your neighbors, your ward, your community at large, extended family for sure. And so, how do we want to see ourselves, or what is kind of how we want to project out into the world that we live in? And does that, as we get feedback coming back in, is it matching up? So you can have a situation in a family where you go, we're really good at going, like worshiping, going to church and stuff. And then maybe you get a visit from someone in a leadership position who's like, we just haven't seen you in a while. Where are you?
Right.
And so there's a lot of mismatches in our lives, like incongruencies of how we think versus what people perceive. And then you have to reconcile, do we care about what that person thinks, or do we care about that organization outside of ourselves? Um, and then where are we going? What do we want to have happen in our home? Do we want our kids to learn how to work? Do we want them to have jobs? Do we want to be focused on sports? What are the big focuses or the direction of our lives? And you can look outside of your own family and reflect back to your own past. And there were kids you'd be like, they're a sports family. And, no matter what, they were at a weekend tournament. That was their focus. Um, and then how did they get there? Like strategy, consistency, patterns of organizations of coming together, trying to figure out what that looks like. So for you, if you were to look at yourself today, with your not even quite having a family yet, as far as active children, active parenting in the home, it's coming. What would you say are your top three values that you want to emphasize in the home that you are?
I think the first one was one you already touched on, of course, honoring God. I mean, going to church and religion and whatnot. I think that's where most morals and good principles are instilled. I would say the second would probably be family in terms of being around people that have uh, emotional investment in their well-being, as well as I think there's an element of financial investment, but I'd say people that truly desire their or our growth and betterment, and then probably value in terms of something I would want my kids to know is very important to me and then apply for themselves is a work ethic. I mean, being able to work really hard and be dependable and accountable. And I think that's also instilled through those other two, of course, through church and family. But that then I guess branches off into work and other responsibilities and such. But I would say probably those, religion, family, and then work ethic.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, they kind of they start to reinforce each other,
Right.
right?
Yep.
And so hopefully your family that you want to spend time with um, has similar values, and you can see in extended families where that isn't the case. And I can look at my extended family, and I come from a very rich, I believe, family heritage. Some of my family was active in the church, some of them weren't. And yet the core values and principles that we were getting when we were there were all very um, reinforcing. Like all of my extended family, they were hard workers. That was something I learned young. My cousins, we lived different. We were what they called city kids, and yet we worked. We just
Yeah.
didn't have a farm. We didn't have a ranch. Our livelihood wasn't our work, and so it was different. But you walk outside and you see how incredible it was to make sure your kids understand that they have a contribution into the survival of the family. And it's sad. My dad said that to me once. I said, Dad, if you could name one problem the world has nowadays, what would it be? And he was like, people don't grow up on farms. And he goes, because if you didn't get up and milk the cow, that cow cried all day and you didn't have milk for whatever mom was making, cake or bread or whatever the things were. And it was
Right.
it was very dynamic. And it is sad. That is sad, right? That we don't have that. And yet grateful. I can literally go to a store and get a gallon of milk. And if my cow dies, I don't have to go without that. Um, so yeah, those kind of like lend itself. So I want to emphasize within strategic leadership versus kind of this emotional thing that happens. Um, there's conviction parenting or principles and values that impact your vision or conditions. And you can't always get away from conditions, right? So like your mood, your stress level, how you feel in a day, there's sickness, there's insecurities, um, thought errors, thinking errors play uh, in our church. President Cook and his wife give a really good story of he was driving home from work, and I'm going to get some of it wrong, but he said he's sitting in the car, and as he's getting to the door, he hears the chaos happening. And he's like, man, do I want to walk into that?
Right.
Like nothing he has done in his mind does he deserve that,
Right.
right? And yet that's his responsibility. and you stop and you go, yeah, but she necessarily hasn't either, right? Like we're raising a bunch of chaotic little, humans that need some leadership. And
Right.
so you got to walk in as a father and or be present as a wife, mother, and you got to get a hold of these things, which are the kids. They need it so much. And so all of those things come in. You've had a hard day at work and your frustration level is definitely going to impact how you parent in the home. And so strategic leadership vision would say you got to get yourself together
Right.
first. You got to be sure if you're disciplining, it's not out of anger, because we talked a little bit about that before, like those things stick. And so conviction is the internal part of you, like the why that has to steady despite the emotional weather of what's going on around you. And that's really hard because you can see how, even without kids right now, you're impacted by stuff, right? So um, you got to figure out how to not be so responsive in a way that is chaotic. And that is something I think that I really struggled with when I was a young mom, is I just didn't have that concept in my mind of how to figure out the emotional temperature that I had in relation to how that impacted my kids, how that impacted my husband, and even other things like, as a Relief Society president, as a young Relief Society president, I reached a point in one day where I was like, if I give every single sister or every woman in our ward 1%, I still have nothing left. Like I'm empty, and there's too much need from outside things that is interfering with what's going on in my home. And those are choices we have to make as we accept callings, as we volunteer for things, as we give our energy other places, even at work. Like how much, they call it like the 5-year cycle. You start to realize within 5 years, you're probably not friends with the same people you're friends with today. Um, and so, how much do you want to give to those people? How much do they really matter in relation to your kids and your family? And that's why I think it's really great that you're thinking about the priority of, where you want your family to go is extended family. That's because those are people that matter. And you'll have friends who you kind of bring in like that. But leading by conviction means you're choosing your tone even when you're tired, right? You're choosing to correct your children with firmness and love, even when you're frustrated, even when they lie straight to your face. They are not telling you the truth. They're not telling you the truth. And then resisting the impulse, right? To force your will onto them. And so for me, just as I thought about it, like the conviction of the choices that we're making in our strategic leadership is that this is who we are, even on the hard days, right? It kind of goes with character is who you are when no one's watching, that kind of thing. It's all of that versus, conditional parenting is this is how I feel. And so this is what I'm going to do. And that's what we see in the world that we live in. That's why there's so much drift, right? Like people feel this way. They're angry about this for today. And so they're going to do that. And that seems right. But then tomorrow they might change their mind, based on literally how they're feeling. So the way I want to kind of work that into kids is when you're really focusing on where you want your kids to go, there's a lot of balance and safety that comes to them. And so in my mind, those are like anchors, right? They know that they can come home and there's something that they can trust. There's something that they can count on that they can't get when they go to school, if they go to school, if you're not homeschooling, right? Or
Right.
um, if they go out into a situation with a friend group, they're on a team, right? They hate their coach, they hate someone on their team, which hate's a strong word, but that's how kids talk. That's how they feel. Um, or that they're not happy with. And so you provide that secure attachment for them that says, you can trust me. I'm not going to disappear on you, even when things get hard. And kids really need that. They need that so much. And I don't know what your experience was, if you felt like home was a place that you felt anchored outside of, um, you know, like when there was chaos in your life, if home was a place you could come to get some some of those things, but those are things you should really be thinking about in your life: this steadiness, this peaceful tone, this consistent standard. Even for you, like, right, is home the place you come, you put your bag down and you're like, okay, this is where I can come. And it is for me. Um, that hasn't always been the case, right? And that was choices that I made. Sometimes didn't. Like sometimes you're going through a hard time.
Yeah.
Sometimes you got a kid that's just giving you a run for your money, or you've got a situation like employment wise that's just really stressful. And so sometimes home brings a lot of anxiety. Um,
Yeah, if I could, I mean, if I could add to that, you kind of asked what my experience was. And I think as I just sit here thinking about it, and you had texted earlier this week kind of about some questions, I assume to my siblings as well, kind of about our general outlook of how we were raised. And I think more than anything, I think it was the general setting was yes, there was a lot of secure attachment, but I think as I think about it, and as we kind of talked about it this week, I think there were a lot of seasons in my own growth, I would say, and my maturing and all of that. I think there were during most big phases of life through what I can really remember, I would say really memories kind of start at about 8 to 10 years old. I don't really remember a whole lot before that. I mean, I remember, fragments of things, but, from 10 to probably 12 and 12 to 15 and 15 to 18, like I would say all of those were kind of big shifts and changes. And there were seasons of, yeah, everything's good and great, and then there were seasons of everything's not good and great. But that's, I think a lot of because it fluctuated based on, yours and dad's circumstances and job and whatnot, and things that I probably don't even recognize and whatnot, and how you were trying to parent each kid generally, but also individually. And I think, it's something that I would say that there were lots of convictions. I specifically knew what the convictions were, what was important, what were the values, what were those things. I can't speak for anyone else. But I would definitely say in all of that, though, still there were still lots of conditional led behaviors. And I would say a lot of that was because from what I understand in raising kids, there's just so much emotions that it's hard for there not to be tension and um, uh, high stress and anxiety, but also all of the other things that kind of go with that. And I'm oversimplifying the complexity of all of that, I'm sure, but I think I knew that it was a good place to go, and I knew that it was a lot better than anywhere else. But I would also say that it was also challenging because I think that in part, maybe people my age were the first ones to really navigate the technology um, revolution in a sense. I don't know exactly what maybe that would be called, but getting phones at a young age and having access to the internet and all of that, I would say it was a very, as you always say, I I don't think anyone knew what we didn't know. And and I think that I knew that home was a good place, but I also now looking back go, there was so much change going on in the world, and there still is, that I couldn't say whether it was bad or good. Or I think it was good because I think we all turned out pretty okay. But um, I definitely think that there's a lot more knowledge and whatnot nowadays, and looking back going, okay, these were some things that, my generation struggled with, and now we can either get on track or it's only been perpetuated. But I definitely see the value in the conviction and as you said, the secure attachments. I definitely feel that that was important and valued. But as a kid, it was hard to recognize and even hard to probably rely on those relationships just because I didn't know how to.
well, and I think you make a really good point, right? Like the technology revolution definitely, I mean, So just in a 10-year period, we went from flip phones to smartphones.
Right.
And that changed the world. Dad and I went to Belize and I was shocked in what was it like early 2000s or it was probably 1999 or
Mm.
2099, sorry, 2019, bleh, 2019.
2019. Yeah.
And I was shocked at how many kids had smartphones
Yeah.
and they literally didn't have a roof. They lived in cinder block walls, and like that's how impactful the technology revolution was. And um, so yeah, I don't think we can underscore. I think to your point, we retroactively can look back and see now the fruits of that. And a lot of that isn't good.
Right.
And so that is something I would say definitely as a parent today. You should work that into your strategic leadership vision and you should have some strong convictions about what that looks like. And those should not be highly conditional, right? Like the parents got to be really tight on how they feel about smartphones with their kids if it's appropriate. I had a strong conviction that my kids couldn't have social media till they were 18, right? And then we had to negotiate some of those spaces where, like, Hannah could use my Instagram, or I had to have passwords to Instagram or things like that, right? And so there are lots of ways I think to manage that. But once the door is open, there's no closing it. There's no putting the genie back in the bottle, so to speak, on that. And so I would be very mindful of those things. And we see that nowadays.
Right.
Those are things I would not be lackadaisical on at all. And the spiritual component of that, right? Like I feel like in some ways there's justification made. Well, my kid can post on social media every day about how much they love Jesus. And I'm like, okay, I have strong thoughts and opinions about that. And I'm like, yeah, but that's not like maybe if that's makes you sleep at night better. I don't see that as a good trade-off. I think there's way more negativity coming in. I feel like it really is a door opening to Satan
Yeah.
having access to your kids in so many different ways. Through whether that's through peer groups, whether that's through forums, other people can track your kids, pictures they're posting online, of where they're at location wise. I just think it's, man, I'd keep that genie in the bottle as long as you can. That's my personal conviction on social media and technology and giving your kid a smartphone. But I understand the importance of people wanting their kid to have a leash.
Sure.
So I don't know. Those are things I would definitely be talking to my spouse about and I'd get on the same page about. Um, so again, some of these things are going to cause reactive parenting, right? And for sure, cell phones were something that I was crazy about all the time. I couldn't, and we didn't have a good scaffolding for that of how to decide what was good and what was bad and how to manage that. And there was a lot of chaos, difficulty with compliance, for sure emotional fatigue. And all of those things indicate that there's not enough principle governing whatever's happening. And so, in my mind, if you can't get to where there's some strategic agreement between the parents, then maybe that just has to stay on the shelf until we can navigate it, right? Versus just giving it away, grappling, trying to get back. And so I think cell phones are a great example of that. I guess one of the things I want to say in contrast is the strategic parent is really focused on the development of the child, the development of the relationships, the development of what's coming for the future, right? That you're sitting down almost like a business going, okay, so some of the strategic thing too is like the symbolism of what we're doing. So whether we realize it or not, and this is part of the text I sent out, we're transmitting values or language to our kids. And that might not be value based, or it might be value based respect, right? That was something big in our family.
Right.
We would transmit our ideas or beliefs about things, whether that was politics or religion or conduct or whatever. And so you got to be really clear about how you're defining that. Like, I don't think there was ever very much confusion about what dad and I thought about things. I think it was all pretty clear for the most part. The big things made sense. For sure, you could say my dad or my mom think this about marriage or whatever, right? About children, about whatever those things are. And so for me, I look back and I go, the things that were really important to me that I had written down that I wanted to be clear about. um, and that comes into this clarity of mission, I think has three anchors is respect, trust, support, accountability, and service. Right. I wanted those things very integrated into all the systems. So, the tone of how we corrected, we talked a little bit about this in summer, we'd have boot camp
Yep.
because I was like, okay, we're pulling all these threads back. We got to get you back to where we're all in the same scaffolding. The rhythm of the way the family worked. It wasn't about me being a dictator. It was about, okay, there are these things we got to get done. How do we want to do it? And you'd all be like, well, I don't want to clean the kitchen. I was like, great, I'll clean the kitchen. But if I'm not doing the bathroom, then you're doing the bathroom. So I will do the thing that no one wants to do. But that means we all have to work together, right? And so there was this kind of rhythm of how the family would work. We tried really hard to do like family home evening on Sundays, right? Those small symbols are things that we did. One of the things I was thinking of is when we all decided to read the Book of Mormon and then go on a trip once we got it finished. And Dad and I sat down and we're like, we're never going to get through the Book of Mormon. Like, this is taking way too long. Maybe we just need to like give it one more little humph and then let's go on the Yellowstone trip. And so we did because it was just, we were like, it's going to be in their next lifetime if we don't do something right. Because it was just so hard to try and make that fit into the box as nice as we'd had. One of the times I came home from education week and I was like, all right, I really want to get clear because I'm struggling with this whole idea the church was really changing about, and I had wanted to make it simple, like follow the prophet. We follow the rules that the prophet has set. Well, then a lot of the things started changing about dating and things like that and all this stuff. And so I don't know if you remember, I had a sign that said, let's see where it's from Ether 12:4, and it says, well, wherefore, whoso believeth in God might with surety hope for a better world, yea, even a place at the right hand of God, which hope cometh from faith or of faith maketh an anchor to the souls of men, which would make them sure and steadfast, always abounding in good works, being led to glorify God. So the end of that was on this black piece of wood, and it said, be sure and steadfast, always abounding in good works, being led to glorify God. And I felt like if I could take a concept, that's it. That's what I wanted for my kids. Be sure and steadfast, always abounding in good works as they glorify God. And I think that is where I tried to really hone you guys in as your mom. Um, and so as I matured, as I grew up, I think I did better. I think those were things that you guys were able to start to understand as you went out into the world and came back in. Like you guys had some different things in your life, in your home that made it better for you
Yeah.
in the world that you were living in, right? Like you started to see things like respect, service, um, honesty. That changed the way other people treated you. And that gave you a lot of, I would say, privilege
Yeah.
in a way, right? Like people would be like, oh, yeah, if Andrew said it, we trust Andrew. And we know if Andrew says this, he's going to get this done. And then they treated you with respect and they treated you, in a way that maybe your peers didn't get. And so as you sit down in a strategic way with your spouse and you start to go, okay, what are the ways that we want our family to run? You need your clarity of mission. You need to have ways that you're consistently applying those things, family prayer, in addition, correlation between the husband and the wife sitting down, like, okay, here's what we're going to do this week. Here's how we're going to get through this chaos, because your life is going to be chaotic, but how you respond to that is the convictions of the way you are principally living your life, right? And then you have to be adaptable. There were dad and I think I mentioned we couldn't agree on what's the word? Coming home late. We couldn't a
Curfew.
curfew. We couldn't agree on curfew. And he was like, well, if there's a good reason, they should be able to stay out. And I had been raised a lot more strict. And for him, he had been raised a lot more loose. And so we finally got to the place where it was like, unless there's a good reason, it's 12 o'clock, right? But why can't we be a little more flexible on that? And I think that was the right thing to do. And that's why I think having a conversation with your kids saying, well, you know, our our curfew is this, but you're telling us you're going to do this. And that seems like a good thing. So for this one time, or maybe we have a family phone and you know you can't have it to yourself, but maybe for this time, right? Like there's so many things that fit in that flexibility that you need of strategy, but the consistency of you guys taking the time of not letting this emotional drift come into your life, where you're being very, very clear that if you're not taking your family in a direction, the world will. You have to be paying attention. And I that is the things that keep me up at night are those things right now. As I look at my grandchildren, as I look at my own children, I'm like, man, you guys are impacted. You are so impacted constantly in the world that we live in. And it's confusing. We've talked about that. And so I'm really my prayers for all of you are that you have clarity, that you're taking these things that you're studying and learning as you read, as you talk to, as you find principled sources of influence, that you're really paying attention. Because I just think if I had had access to more of those things sooner, like I would have had way less fear in
Yeah.
my life. Now I worry for you guys because I just see how easy it is to hook hook on to something that really is cotton candy, right? And so it's not, and that's just part of figuring
Yeah.
life out. But I hope that this takeaway, people listening today can understand that having vision stabilizes your life. It makes it so when it's time to sacrifice, when you have to give something up as a parent, like sleep, which I'm seeing that in all the new moms, right? They're
Right.
sacrificing because they're looking ahead for these babies. It stabilizes the conflict that you're going to have with each other. It the vision that you have can outlast whatever the difficult circumstances you're traversing right now. It also protects the intentions of what you're doing regarding your identity. Like, I am a mother in this world, and being a mother has value and purpose, and it's ancient and it matters. It's not this girl boss stuff that we're seeing around that's impacting women. And that's something I want to talk about later. It's infiltrated the church, it's infiltrated friend groups, it's infiltrated what we see on television, is this idea that, you know, women should have it all. And I'm like, motherhood, 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 raise your children to God. And so that's kind of where I want to finish. Like for next time is I want to come back to a little bit of ways that we can, as women, focus on some of those things.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say I would love to kind of do a part two of this. I think there's a I think you've established kind of a good framework for us to start um, contextualizing some things. And now I would love to take more time to kind of go into kind of some specifics as you just mentioned, and may have a little bit more discussion about that because I think that those are things that I now having a little bit more context, I go, oh, I'm seeing some things that apply to this and some thoughts on those I would love from you. So maybe we kind of plan on doing a
Okay.
part two next week and whatnot. But is there anything, I mean, last thought, I thought you kind of wrapped it up wonderfully there, but kind of last thought before we close.
Yes. So if I was to just, again, briefly tell someone that I was talking to about what strategic leadership would look like, it's not a bunch of rules, right? It's not like we have to do this, we have to do this, we have to do this. Nobody likes ticking boxes. And yeah, I love ticking boxes. I really do, right? I have sticky notes everywhere. But the reason why it matters is it kind of gets you into this rhythm. Like, okay, so I clean the kitchen. Okay, so now I got to vacuum. So now I got to mop, right? It does, there are some tasks oriented within this kind of vision, this kind of mindset. But most of it is kind of knowing who you are, where you're going, what you're doing, and acting on that in a way that really gives you peace. That you're like, okay, we have this hard season right now with our son Andrew, right? But he's been taught well. He knows he's going to be okay, and we can have these small little things instead of maybe the big things that we want to do. But we have faith and trust in that we have created this vision, which is more or less architecture. There's this house called Andrew, and he's got all the right walls. He's got the right wiring. He's got like everything's everything is top quality. He's got it. And now we're just going to give him some space to let the atmosphere of who he is and who he's becoming become. And it's okay. We don't have to we don't have to let the chaos of the world, you know, come in. We can keep this structure and know that he's doing it. God has just as much of a part of this as we do as parents, but that you're looking at your family as kind of a structure. You're looking at each child as part of that structure or their own structure as well, depending on your view, right? Like you have the ingredients to go to be in the world and to be strong. And that's what parents have been intentional in. That's the strategic leadership view, is that you have value because you existed anciently, and we have been a part of making sure all of the right ingredients, all of the things have gotten hooked up, and it's ready to go.
Yeah.
And then for you, your view looking back like on dad and I is that we have that equal kind of support, right? You can lean on us, you can have us help when you need help, because we are some of what is your security from the past. And same with your wife's family, right? That they have influence and impact on your children because they provide this sense of peace and calm and security in your life and their life. And that's the legacy. That's what we're trying to build.
Yeah. That's great. Thanks, Mom. I think that's a great place to close. I look forward to part two next week.
Okay, sounds great.